Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. It is October 8th, 2020. This is episode 29. My name is Andy Zee. I'm the host of our show. We are in a moment that is fast moving. Almost every day, things are happening that create tremendous anxiety, terror, and hopefully hope. Today's show is going to feature and get into the movement that has begun to drive the Trump-Pence regime from power, the Out Now movement and what lies behind it, and the great challenge before us. And so with that, we want to begin with a special treat for our viewers. We're going to be showing you the initial rushes from two incredible people of the Refuse Fascism pledge to the people of the world at this moment. We're going to begin with this first rush from the great R&B singer Lalah Hathaway, who's not only a wonderful singer, but a committed person, as was her dad, Donny Hathaway, who was also a great R&B singer and also committed. And she's going to read about half of the pledge, maybe a little bit more, and then you're going to hear from Dr. Cornel West finishing the pledge. These are among several prominent people who have recorded videos that we'll be soon putting together for you. So I want to go right to that, and then we'll have some open commentary with myself and my co-host, Sunsara Taylor.
In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. The Trump-Pence regime must go. We will speak, we will stand, we will shout and march together every day. We pledge to stop a regime that imperils the people of the world and the earth itself. We will take to the streets day after day and call forth others. We demand Trump-Pence out now. We will not stop until they're gone. We do not comply with a regime putting targets on the backs of Black, brown, and Native people, denying women control of their bodies, forcing LGBTQ people back into the closet. We do not accept a society ruled by hate and bigotry, ignorance and brutality, demeaning and cursing other people's countries and threatening them with destruction. There can be no more children torn from their parents and locked in cages, no more fire and fury from the mouth of a demented bully with his finger on the nuclear trigger. No more mass COVID deaths from science-hating lunacy. No more law and order of official terror by bullets, batons, and tear gas. No longer can we live with howling mobs resurrecting Jim Crow, fascist thugs attacking our protests, the right to vote stolen by defenders of the Confederacy. We will not worship the flag or accept a theocracy. We will not become collaborators on a march to a racist genocide. We will not hand the future of scorchers of this planet. 4 more years, 4 more months.
And it could be too late. Too late to change the course of history as the Trump-Pence regime sabotages the election and drags humanity to the very edge of extinction itself. Here and now, we pledge to unite in our millions, rising together in nonviolent resistance to stop a great horror. We pledge to stay in the streets, overcoming fear and uncertainty until this vicious American fascism is brought to a halt. We pledge our determination to prevail over a regime that imperils the people of the world and the earth itself. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.
So that was Lalah Hathaway and Cornel West reading the Refuse Fascism Pledge to Resist, the pledge to the people of the world. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. And as you heard, they are calling for in that pledge, we are calling for in this pledge, to stay in the streets until this regime is removed from power. This is an urgent need for humanity. We face a fascist regime that is barreling towards a showdown with these elections. We'll be getting into that more in this show. But this call has begun. On October 3rd, Refuse Fascism launched an Out Now movement, which is calling for people from many different points of view to come together in the town squares and the city squares all across the country, united behind one demand. People from very different ways of life, people who are ache in the heart about this regime, people who are active in struggles from the environment to Black Lives Matter, to immigrant rights, to women's rights and LGBTQ rights. All different people, all different struggles coming together. I just want to say to the people who began this, big ups to all of you. We're very few who are starting, very few. But if you have the courage of your convictions to fight to get more and more people into the streets, to join us, because this is what is the only course that can really remedy the situation and stop this barreling towards a fascist America, we will and we can prevail. We do face an existential moment, and we're going to get into that in this show. But before we do, I want to welcome Sunsara Taylor, my co-host.
Hi, Andy. It's good to be here.
So we together have been working on this, on the show. We've been working on it in Refuse Fascism, and
Yeah, I want to echo what Andy said and really give a lot of love and backing to everybody with Refuse Fascism and others who launched this Out Now movement day after day and who've been in the streets. It really matters. You know, this last week, just yesterday when we're recording this, it came out yet further exposure. Jeff Sessions, the people in the Department of Homeland Security, the calculated insistence of separating children at the border from their parents, from people who had committed no crimes, and the going back again and again. No, even the infants. The nature of this regime, what it means to humanity, this is something we have to hold in our hearts and be responsible to. It's captured in that pledge to the people of the world, to those who are in the crosshairs and the line of fire of this regime. So it is a really important moment to keep our strategic nerve, even if we're starting with few. We're going to get more into it a little bit later in the episode. I have a teaser of an interview. I think we'll air the full thing next week with the author Gene Guerrero, who wrote a new book called Hatemonger that really goes into Stephen Miller, the White Nationalist Agenda, as she calls it, of the Trump-Pence regime that's responsible for this child separation and the whole approach to immigrants. So we'll get into it in this episode, but this really is about the people of the world.
it is for the immigrant children. It is for the LGBTQ people who could lose the rights. Recently, one, it is for women who could lose the right to abortion and birth control. It is to save the planet. It is for the Black lives that matter, that have been destroyed by this system, that could become a fast genocide. You'll hear about that more in today's show. But again, I want to say and go back to this point of, where do you get the courage of your convictions? To those who have begun this great effort of being in the streets day after day, building up to the elections, and then, depending on how things develop, then being able to give strength to the protest and to the movement that has to come after that. Where does this courage of convictions come from? The courage to be in the streets in nonviolent, sustained protest come from? Well, it does come from the fact that you are representing the interests of humanity and all the people I just spoke of, and that Sunsara went into more depth on, and will go even further in this program on the immigrants. It comes because of what you're fighting for. You're fighting for the end of a fascist regime that has real meaning. And it's not good meaning, it's horrific meaning. It means the end of the rule of law. Such as it's been, as unfair as it's been, this is a qualitative change, and I'm going to be getting into that in this dialogue that I have had this past week with Jason Stanley. We're going to show 25 minutes of it. You can go on our channel, YouTube, at the RevComs, and see the full hour and a half. We're going to get into what a difference this makes, but you are speaking for the interests of humanity, number one. This is where your conviction comes from. You are speaking for an end to this fascism, and the only way it can be done by mass struggle of millions of people, ultimately in a nonviolent way, standing up against fascism. And that opens up the door for any kind of better future. But how do you know this? Where does your courage come from? It comes from the fact that what you are representing in the streets is what's actually happening. It's what's objectively true. That means you're being scientific. Scientific is very important because when you're coming from reality, you have the potential to reach into what people are actually experiencing, even if they don't understand it correctly. Through your actions, they can understand it more. This is much of what's modeled in the work and developed in the work of Bob Avakian. I'll say a few things about that in a little while. But it's because you're representing the interests of the people, because you're speaking about what needs to be done and you're approaching it from reality. And let me say one last thing about where your courage and conviction comes from and how it is that we can prevail, that we could actually win this battle. Each day, sometimes 3 times a day, some new horror from this regime comes about. We are acting in the streets in relationship to that. And that wakes people up, and sometimes it depresses them. When that repression comes down, some people back up. They say, well, I don't know if we can do that. But you're showing them the way you can do it. So it's not just what we're doing in the square, the public squares, but it's how we're relating to these other things that are happening in society. But that's not enough. You do have to go out and get the people. The town square needs to become a magnet for people, and we need to go out and organize people and get thousands and hundreds and then thousands of people going out and organizing to bring people into the streets and bring them in now. It'll be too late if we wait to the time of the election, because we do need to forge that unity and learn how to work together now. So with that, let's go to telling people what's the actual trajectory of today's episode.
Okay, so in today's episode, one of the other reasons we can't wait to get started in the streets is Donald Trump and his regime are already stealing this election. So that's going to be our first segment, 5 ways the Trump-Pence fascist regime is already stealing the election. We're going to break that down. We're going to bring you the final 2 installments of the series from Bob Avakian, Donald Trump, Genocidal Racist, read by Noche Diaz, the national spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs. We're going to show one early on and one towards the end of the episode. The heart of our episode today is going to be a dialogue, a very important dialogue that was held between the author Jason Stanley, author of How Fascism Works, and Andy Zee, my co-host. It was an event sponsored just this past week by Revolution Books and the Brooklyn Book Festival, where they talk about how fascism works and how we can stop it. We streamed the whole thing live on our YouTube channel. We still have it up. It's an hour and a half, very meaty, very important dialogue between the two of them. You can watch the whole thing on our channel at the RevComs on YouTube. And we're going to bring you an edited segment of it, about 25 minutes of it, that's very meaty. It's going to give you a lot of understanding. You should watch it. You should spread it. This is going to help us understand what we're up against, and it's a great tool to bring others into this fight, to give them the understanding they need. As I mentioned a couple minutes ago, we're going to bring you a teaser of an interview I did as well, linked to this idea of Donald Trump as genocidal racist, with the author of a new book called Hatemonger. I interviewed Gene Guerrero, and the book is called Hatemonger, about Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and the White Nationalist Agenda. It's very important what we begin to get into. And so I think by the end of the episode, you're going to have a very, very deep sense of the fascism we're facing and why it needs to be driven out and what we're doing in this. So,
okay, so this is a really important episode coming at, as I said, a momentous time. And we just want to welcome all of our new viewers to this show, and also our returning viewers. And to all of you new viewers, the name of the show is the RNL Revolution Nothing Less Show. It's a show about an actual revolution, about preparing today for the time when we could actually make a real revolution in this country and overthrow this system and bring about a radically new world. And the framework for that has been developed by the revolutionary leader and the revolutionary thinker Bob Avakian, who's developed what we call the new communism. And you can find out about that if you go to revcom.us and you watch previous episodes of our show. This is an incredible thing. It's a different way, a new way, a more scientific way of understanding how we got to this place, why the world is the horror that it is today for the majority of humanity, why we've put the planet in jeopardy, how all that comes from the system, and how we could actually build the understanding and the unity and the organization necessary to overthrow it when that becomes possible and bring about a society where humanity could really flourish. So you need to get into the work of Bob Avakian. And indeed, Avakian has developed an understanding of fascism and of the particular moment that we're living in. And a lot of what you'll hear me say in the dialogue with Jason Stanley is based on the work and the framework established by Bob Avakian. And again, as Sunsara said, you're going to see 25 minutes today of an hour-and-a-half discussion I had with Jason Stanley. It was very engaging. But again, I'm coming from this framework that you need to avail yourself of knowing about and getting into, and so that's what we want to let you know about what this show is. I do want to say to those who are returning viewers and to people out there who really come to this show because they aspire to a radically different world, to revolution, that this battle to drive out the Trump-Pence regime is a necessary and important battle if there's to be a revolution. The stakes of this are enormous. And I want to say to everyone, whether you're for revolution or not, or never really thought about it, any positive and progressive future, anything that humanity should aspire to at this point in history has to go through removing a fascist regime. That's just a fact. And so that's where the importance of what we're talking about in the episodes at this moment are all about. So with that, let's get right to the show.
5 ways the Trump-Pence fascists are already stealing the election, and what we can and must do about it. Many people have been talking about Trump's threats to steal the election and then violently enforce that theft. Some now say that we should prepare to go into the street after Trump and the Republic fascists make good on those threats to try to steal the election. But there's a problem with that plan. The fascists already are stealing the elections and threatening violence to enforce it. Here are just 5 of many steps they have taken or are taking. 1. Suppressing the votes of Black and Latino people. Trump and the Republic fascists are sending, in their own words, an army of 50,000 poll watchers, for which they are recruiting ex-military and off-duty cops into Black and Latino neighborhoods to threaten and intimidate voters. On top of that, at the debate, Trump told his voters to themselves question, that is, to intimidate people at the polls.
I'm urging my supporters to go into the polls and watch very carefully.
2. Attacking mail-in ballots. Mail-in ballots are an important way that people can vote safely without risking the deadly COVID virus. Yet Trump has launched a lying and dangerous attack on mail-in ballots as fraudulent.
Election results only legitimate if you win.
We have to be very careful with the ballots. The ballots, that's a whole big scam. We want to make sure the election is honest, and I'm not sure that it can be.
He has cut funding for the post office so that ballots can't be received or counted in time. And the Republic fascists have closed ballot drop-off stations in the cities of states they control, where many votes for Biden will come from. 3. Preparing an army of lawyers to contest the election in states that go for Biden. The fascists want to tie things up to muddy the waters, create confusion, and allow Trump to use the Supreme Court or other non-electoral means to throw the contest his way, which Trump has admitted to be part of his plan.
I think this will end up in the Supreme Court.
4. Preparing violent fascist mobs to go into the streets. In the presidential debate, Trump repeatedly refused to condemn white supremacy, and he openly called on the fascist Proud Boys to stand by.
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
He has also given vocal support to people who have threatened, shot, run over, and even killed peaceful protesters against police murder and white supremacy.
I guess he was in very big trouble. He probably would have been killed.
Even today, these fascists go into the streets and even state legislatures brandishing automatic weapons to threaten and terrorize. They are intimidating people in advance and preparing for what they see as the real thing, which for some of them is a one-sided genocidal replay of the Civil War, in which this time the wrong side wins. 5. Preparing to declare martial law and put into place forces accountable only to him. Trump has taken forces loyal to him in the Department of Homeland Security and especially ICE and Border Patrol, the government agencies charged with controlling, suppressing, arresting, and deporting immigrants, and made them into a special force and sent them to a number of cities. He has said that if people protest this election at all, he will declare it an insurrection and suppress it.
How are you going to do that? We have the right to do that. We have the power to do that if we want. Look, it's called insurrection. We just send in and we do it very easy. I mean, it's very easy. I'd rather not do that because there's no reason for it. But if we had to, we'd do that and put it down within minutes.
He has warned of special emergency presidential powers that only he knows about. These threats and actions on their own are more than serious enough to impeach and drive from office this criminal and his gang. Yet, in the face of Trump and the fascists, not only saying that they will do this, but beginning to do it, we are told to wait and wait and wait. No, we need to be in the streets now. We need to be in the streets now, demanding that these fascists be held accountable for these crimes, as well as their many other crimes, and be driven from office before the election that they are planning to steal. Trump has already done more than enough to warrant impeachment and removal from office. We need to be in the streets now, sounding the alarm to the millions and tens of millions who hate what Trump stands for and do not want to live under fascism, but don't yet get the full threat or have not heard that there is a way to fight this. We need to be in the streets now, building up our organized strength and learning how to work together and how to resist and neutralize the fascist attacks, not waiting until it may be too late. This is not a normal election. This is an emergency. We need to understand that and act on it. We need to answer the call of refusefascism.org for massive nonviolent actions in the streets every single day from here out. For documentation of the above points, go to revcom.us.
I'm Noche Diaz, a spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs. I'll be reading Donald Trump, Genocidal Racist Part 9 by Bob Avakian. When a white supremacist Trump supporter killed 2 people and seriously wounded another who were taking part in protests against the police shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin, Trump condemned those protesting but never said a word against this murder. Not only that, but prominent supporters of Trump, Tucker Carlson of the fascist Fox News, Ann Coulter, and others, justified and even glorified this murder of protesters. Did Trump denounce or even distance himself from any of this justification and glorification of this white supremacist murder? No. After saying in one of his rants during the Republican convention that Second Amendment people could take care of Portland in a day, Trump supported Second Amendment white supremacists mobilizing to attack protesters in Portland, Oregon. And he called on these very fine people to take Portland. Someone, apparently a Trump supporter, was killed in the course of this white supremacist attack on the protests in Portland. Trump is encouraging what he hopes will be a one-sided civil war, in which the armed forces of white supremacy and other horrific oppression will wipe out anyone protesting violence by police and terrorize everyone who opposes or simply does not fit into Trump's program for a fascist America. If you still think this is an exaggeration, going too far to say this about Trump, then you still don't know who Donald Trump really is. Look for part 10, the very real danger of Donald Trump as a genocidal racist. This is a series appearing on revcom.us.
All right, so welcome everybody online, different platforms, and welcome Jason Stanley.
Thank you
doing?
very much.
Okay, so we have a lot to talk about tonight. We had a lot to talk about yesterday before the so-called debate, and now we have even more evidence in front of us. The title of the program is How Fascism Works and How to Stop It, a dialogue. Can it happen here? Is it happening here? And what to do? So you want to start, Jason?
Yes, thank you, Andy. So my book was published 2 years ago in September 2018. At the time, people charged me with alarmism. People said that now I would like nothing more than to be wrong, than to have been wrong. However, I'm concerned that events have, if anything, vindicated the concerns that I was raising in my work. The reasons people gave for why I was being alarmist is they said things like, fascism requires an informal militia on the streets. It requires a relationship between the leader and militias on the streets. And we see no such development in the United States. We do not see white supremacist militias being organized to defend the fascist social and political movement. I think that's one case where we see that we were presented with a reason for why the call for the description fascism was overwrought, and I think that has been met. We saw yesterday in the debate Trump talking to the Proud Boys, telling them to stand down and stand by. There is clearly some kind of between leader and militias. That's the concern here. Now, no one would like to be wrong more than me, let me add. So the second reason that people gave for why calls for fascism were overblown was that the president was not calling into question the democratic system. The president wasn't claiming that elections were rigged. The system was corrupt. The president was not saying that it's either me or the system is rigged. He wasn't directly attacking democracy. Well, I think we see that the president is directly attacking democracy. So again, I would like to be wrong. No one would like to be wrong more than me in this project. And I would like to go back to working on the semicolon or whatever god-awful things I used to do before this. However, that is not the situation in which we find ourselves. Third, the reason that people gave to say that my concern about incipient fascism was alarmist was that the president was not taking control of the party and taking control of the institutions of government. The institutions were supposedly still independent, according to the critics of my work. Fascism is a cult of the leader. It's a cult of the leader who promises national restoration in the face of supposed threats by immigrants, minorities, and leftists. And people said, the Republican Party is not a cult of the leader. The Republican Party is not the same as Trumpism. We're not seeing the courts being taken over, the institutions being taken over by a cult of the leader, by devotion to the leader. There, too, my concern is that we have seen significant progress on that particular front. People say, when you talk about fascism and you say Trump is a fascist, Trump is a fascist, Trumpism is a fascist social and political movement. People say, well, that, you know, Trump isn't at all like, he isn't German or Italian, he's very American. Well, that's a conceptual error about fascism. All fascism must be local. All fascism is palingenic ultranationalism. It's a leader who says, I am the country, and I promise to restore the country's greatness. That leader must remind everybody in the country of the most. They must be the most archetypical member of that country. The fact that Trump, you couldn't be more American than President Trump, is not an argument that he isn't a possible fascist leader. It's an argument that he is a possible fascist leader.
I have to just start by saying I agree with you. And I think I even said this when we spoke after your book came out, that we were getting into, and I think I was a little bit coming at that point quite a bit, saying we had already formed Refuse Fascism, that this is fascism. And I said exactly what you said here. I never wanted to be wrong so much, but this is what we're facing. So look, I think what we'll do is I have some points that I'd like to make too. There's a lot of overlap. I'm in fact going to modify some things because I thought you touched a lot of things. I have to say, when I was rereading your book, How Fascism Works, I said, my gosh, so much of this has actually come to pass, as you just brought out. It was I guess on one level it's edifying, but it's also frightening and extremely serious. So here's what I want to say to people today that could frame our discussion. One, I'm going to make two overarching points that I hope people get out of our entire discussion. There'll be differences. There are differences between us on this, but it's differences within a framework. But my 2 points are, first, that we are in the midst of a rolling coup of the Trump-Pence regime. Okay, so, but we are in the midst of a rolling coup, and we saw part of that last night from Donald Trump. Second, now is the time that we have to act to prevent them from carrying this all the way through. So I will make a few more points that'll introduce this, that will frame our discussion or add points to it. And these bullet points are going to provide some framework for these two main points that I'm trying to make. I do believe we are facing a fascist regime, and I'm saying that not to get into an argument over definitions, because I think actually when we parse this out, there's quite a bit of similarity, but there's probably a difference there too. But we are facing a fascist regime that has truly made horrific and momentous progress in bringing about and advancing a fascist America. This is a regime that is tearing up the rule of law. And at the heart of fascism is that. All the 10 characteristics in your book and more, all of this is part of fascism. But ultimately, to enforce the kind of world that Jason was just talking about in terms of the white supremacy, the patriarchy, the xenophobia, which means the hatred of foreigners, all of this can only be instituted with ultimately a change in the form of rule, where that rule is the rule of the leader. It is the rule of the fascist party, which is being forged through this Republican Party. But look, this is a regime that demonizes immigrants, black people, LGBTQ people, women, Native Americans, the media, and peaceful protesters. This is a regime that opposes science, as you brought out. This is leading to a country right now that is literally burning and drowning at the same time into unbelievable unnecessary death from COVID. A lot of what I've been speaking about comes from a pamphlet that was issued on August 1st by Bob Avakian on the immediate critical situation, the urgent need to drive out the fascist Trump-Pence regime, voting in this election, and the fundamental need for revolution. But the thing about this pamphlet is it really goes into the fundamental change. The heart of this fascism is, as you were just talking, when there's no longer a rule of law, then all the things if you're an immigrants' rights activist, if you're a Black Lives Matter activist, if you're working on the climate, everything you've been working for, that gets wiped off the books.
So my book, my 2018 book, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them, was actually about fascist tactics, all of which I think we see employed here. For example, chapter 9 is called Sodom and Gomorrah. You represent the cities as dens of iniquity, is filled with foreigners and immigrants and leftists and crime and burning, and you run against the cities. That's what you run against the cities to draw a kind of anti-urban, anti-minority, anti-elite vote. We certainly see that tactic being employed in this election.
And at the core of this regime is an unholy alliance between Trump and a Christian fascist movement that has been developing in this country for decades. And they are organized. They are organized up into the military. They have been organized up into the military. They're organized into police forces. They're organized into communities. And this is the core of this regime. This is the organization that people used to challenge you with, Jason, and say, well, where's the organization? Well, there's an organization there that nobody would have ever believed that Trump would come to head a Christian fascist movement. But that is actually what happened, and that is the Faustian bargain that they both made, and some of this is brought to bear in Michael Cohen's new book, Chapter 6. So there you go, a plug for that thug. And Trump also unleashes, and you brought this out, in the basest, white supremacist, racist heart of America in a way that we've seen before in this country. We can't forget that, but it's brought it to what used to be dog whistles are now for real. Yes, they have not yet fully consolidated fascist rule. That is true for now, but that should give us no comfort. That's my second point. Now, you can say that, as I understand, you're saying that a regime means fully consolidated fascist rule. I'm saying there's a regime there that has not consolidated the rule over the country. We can talk about if there's much meaning to that without going to the semicolon. 3, there is, as I said, a rolling coup that is barreling towards a showdown around the election. Trump is already stealing this election. He has a plan in place to use key institutions, the Supreme Court, violent thugs, in and out of uniform, to keep his regime in power. That is why it is so urgent that people take up, from many different points of view, the call that Refuse Fascism has put out to form a broad-based movement, Trump Pence Out Now, a broad-based movement of many diverse political views that has one demand that crosses over, or put it differently, where every single demand, every single aspiration for a decent life has to go through removing this regime from power. For if it succeeds in power, all your dreams and aspirations for a decent life, for Black Lives Matter, for immigrant rights, for the climate, for not even be subjected to nuclear war. We can't forget that this man says if we have nuclear weapons, why can't we use them? All of this is why it's so urgent. We're 34 days away from an election. The Trump-Pence regime is undermining voting rights right now. What he lied about in the debate around what happened in Philadelphia, nonetheless, that he was thrown out, that his people were thrown out, is they went there to intimidate voters. The Christian fundamentalists have already organized 10,000 people to be poll watchers. He and his fascist groups said they're going to mobilize 50,000 former and in and out of uniform military and police to be poll watchers, which really means poll intimidators, and particularly against Black and Latino people. This regime has repeatedly told us, and they've shown us, that they are preparing to stay in power by any and all means. That is the point at which Jason just warned of, that we're not at yet, but we could be. Last night, when Donald Trump was given the chance to say would he respect the election, he would not do it. He said the election will be a fraud and illegitimate. He is now, and as I just said, and he's called it out, and he called out his poll watchers in the debate. These are anti-Semitic and fascist and racist thugs. And he said that he will win this because he has stacked the courts. That was the meaning of what he said. Chris Wallace asked him this directly. Another example, we could talk about this for a long time today, of all the things that have shown him undermining the elections, which would ultimately be undermining those democratic institutions that people are counting on. His attorney general, he has turned into his private lawyer and the lawyer of the regime. He has backed up this whole campaign to delegitimize the election with false claims. He backed Trump up on all the stuff about the post office. I'm not going to take the time to go into that. People know about it. We can talk about it. He's threatened people who protest on the eve of the election, or rather on the election night, with sedition. This is a very serious thing. Why should we not take him seriously? Is there anything that's been indicated that this is a fascist tactic that could actually lead to fascist rule, should they actually do it? He's been defending Trump as the one ruler and not the rule of law. So look, I would say, just to make this point, bring this rolling coup point, there's every evidence that the Trump-Pence regime will not accept the election results if he loses. And his losing, by the way, is not a sure thing. Far from it. All this stuff that Trump does is not just some madman talking, but this is actually has a purpose. It demoralizes and it intimidates the opposition, including from going to the polls.
I don't think it's the strategy the Trump administration seems to be following is to try to convince people that election day will decide things. We know what they've done. It's actually quite remarkably James Bond villanesque. What they've done is they've convinced their supporters that COVID is not to be taken seriously. So if you look at the people who plan on voting on election day in person, they massively favor Trump. Then if you look at the people who plan to vote by mail, they even much more massively favor Biden. So what they're going to do is what the plan seems to be is to declare victory on election eve. And say, well, it's the end of the election, and before the votes are counted. And then, so what we have to do is we have to think not in terms of election day, but in terms of election month. It's going to be a while before the full results are in. And Biden will have to win by a lot in order to and I think he will win by a lot, as long as we get everyone we know out to vote. But we have to be on the streets because they will try to steal the election using the fact that they have a large same-day, in-person voting election advantage. So we absolutely need to be on the streets.
The Biden campaign and the Democratic Party leadership have told us and shown us that they are not going to fight Trump the way he needs to be fought. They want to play by rules that the Trump-Pence regime wants to and needs to shatter to bring about this program. The Democratic Party strategy is to appease swing voters in swing states, to be, as Biden said this last night, to be bipartisan with fascists, to conciliate and not take seriously nor mobilize the tens of millions who feel that we must act against the threats of Trump. And to be clear, Biden did not use the word fascist. He said, I will be president of all the people, of the Republicans and Democrats. But I would submit that that Republican Party has been so hollowed out and so dominated, they didn't even have a party platform this year. Their party platform was to support Trump, okay? That's a telling thing. But it is really an emotional thing to think of what, if this regime stays in power, what this is going to mean for the people of the world and the people of this country. You know, it's almost unbelievable to me that we could be sitting here at this point in October almost of 2020 with tens of thousands of people in concentration camps on the border, COVID hotbeds with people being deported. I could walk through every single thing that this regime is doing, and that would take up our full hour and a half. I'll just leave it at that. Imagine a second term here and we should get into this. There actually will be, in my opinion, a genocide. I just want to say something about genocide, which means the killing of whole peoples. Actually, technically, it means even less than that, but ultimately, that's what it means. This country was founded on a genocide. Slavery was essentially a genocide. The betrayal of Reconstruction had genocidal elements. And then the new Jim Crow. It is a genocide to incarcerate 2.3 million people. And then what the police have done to people. I mean, for God's sake, imagine these people in power. Now, what I want to say about the genocide of the Nazi Germany in the Holocaust, that wasn't the plan that Hitler had, as you've spoken of yourself, Jason. The plan was to deport Jews, to get them out of Germany, and then eventually, as they expanded Germany, to get them on the other side, deep into Russia. But the exigencies of the war, the problems they ran into in the war, particularly against the then Soviet Union, led them at a certain point, fairly late in the game, 8 years into the game, before they took a decision to exterminate the Jews. Every aspiration people have for justice or for a decent world now has to go through removing this regime. I'm going to try and be brief in my last 2 points. If Trump doesn't win by a landslide on election day, they are preparing for everything I just said. They are preparing to take power by any and all means necessary. What does the history that we faced in the last 3 years tell us? That he doesn't do the things he says he's going to do? He's tried to do everything he said he would do, and he's succeeded at many of them. This is why we have to begin this fight right now. It'd be too late to mobilize later on. Yes, people should vote in big numbers against Trump, which means voting for the Democratic Party candidate Biden. This is not a time for a protest vote, okay? This is a time to vote against Donald Trump. And if you don't do that, shame on you. This is going to be on you. But if we only rely on voting, it's going to be disastrous. And if we only wait to act till after Trump has stolen the election with his thugs in the street and his military or National Guard mobilized, you won't do it. And not only that, Biden told you last night not to do it. And the organizations who I hope to be seen in the public square this month, who have said they're not going to go out in the streets until after it's stolen. I want to tell you what Biden said last night. After telling the Proud Boys to stand down and stand by, this is what Trump's actually said, stand by, which can only mean we'll see how the election goes. So this is after I'm trying to shorten this now. He said that the ballots are going to, he would not say that he would honor the election. Let me just back up. He said he would not honor the election. He said there's thousands of ballots being manipulated. I can't go along with that. And he told his paramilitary, or rather his thugs, to stand by. But then Chris Wallace said, Vice President Biden, final question for you. Will you urge your supporters to stay calm while the vote is counted? And will you pledge not to declare victory until the election is independently certified? Okay, there's a little trap in there with the word calm. But essentially, Biden's answer was, here's the deal, his favorite phrase. The fact is, I will accept it and he will too. You know why? Because once the winner is declared and after all the ballots are counted, all the votes are counted, that'll be the end of it. That'll be the end of it. And if it's me, in fact, fine. If it's not me, I'll support the outcome. I'll be president, not just for the Democrats, I'll be president for Democrats and Republicans. Look, Biden was clearly saying to people, don't get out in the streets in major ways. I'm not saying that he won't say stand guard outside or be outside a place where votes are being counted. But this is not a Sunday school exercise here. What Trump is preparing for is deadly serious. This is why what we're calling for is non-violent, sustained protest. All different views. I want to see never-Trumpers. I want to see Democrats. I want to see Bernie people. I want to see anarchists. I want to see my people, the revolutionary communists, out into the streets here and organizing this. Joshua Shanes was quoting another fascist scholar who studied a particular town in Germany. He said in the 30s, he said, the thing that was missing is there was not a united front of the decent people.
Thalberg.
I think that's who it was. Not a united front of the decent people. That's what we actually need.
I think democracy is unusual. Democracy is unique. Most countries live under some form of authoritarianism, some kind of banana republic dictatorship. Democracy only works if we all are devoted to it. We have differences amongst each other. Some of us are religious Christians or religious Muslims or Jews. Others are secular, humanist secular. Some are gay, some are straight. We come from different paths, but a democracy is about us all living together and being devoted to that system. I truly believe we face a moment where we are risking this system. I think this isn't going to be good for anyone, even those who think they will gain from it. Let's get out there on the streets peacefully. Let's not give any photo ops for the opposition, for further recrimination and crackdowns. Let's get people to the polls, get young people to the polls, get everyone to the polls, and let's remember this isn't going to be election day. It's going to be election week or election month. See you on the other end.
Okay, I think that's an important message. I want to say to people, when Jason just spoke of all the different kinds of people who need to be involved and the differences over how we eventually get to a just world, what better way to begin to have that dialogue and debate than standing together against what would be a great horror? For now, be well and stay safe and keep spreading the word about fascism, Jason. Thank you for doing this program with Revolution Books. And good night to everybody who's watching.
Okay, so that was Andy Zee and Jason Stanley in conversation at an event sponsored by Revolution Books and the Brooklyn Book Festival. I just want to remind you that we have the full dialogue available for you to watch on our channel, youtube.com/therevcoms. Watch the whole thing, spread it, share it, get it around. Next, we want to move to just 2 short excerpts of an interview that will air probably next week in full. It's an interview I did with the investigative journalist and author Gene Guerrero on her new book, Hatemonger, about Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and the White Nationalist Agenda. Because the parts we're going to share are out of sequence, I'll just explain that we're going to start with the child separation at the border. This came back in the news in the last few days, as it should never have left the news. And this is actually what turned her on to digging into Stephen Miller and the White Nationalist Agenda at the heart of the Trump-Pence program. Then we're going to skip ahead after she speaks a little bit about that to some of the ways that Stephen Miller and the Trump regime have restructured the Department of Homeland Security, restructured the actual state apparatus and hollowed them out to be an instrument of this, as she calls it, white nationalist agenda. So let's give a listen.
And the way I got interested in his story is I was covering immigration from the busiest border crossing in the United States. I've been covering it for several years, both under the Obama and the Trump administrations. And particularly during the family separation crisis, I really started to wonder about the person who was crafting Trump's immigration policies. They kept talking about how the family separations were about law and order, about national security, that they were only targeting people who broke the law. But I knew from my experience reporting on the front lines that they were primarily targeting families who had broken no laws.
Who are the victims of these policies, and what does this actually mean in real human terms?
Well, the victims are, for example, Jose de Marfuentes, a father from El Salvador who came here after one of his closest friends, a police officer in El Salvador, was killed, and he and his family received death threats themselves because they weren't paying the extortion fees from the local gang. They didn't have the money to do that, and so they were told they were going to be killed. And so he came, with his wife and his 2 children, a 1-year-old Mateo and Andre, who was 4 years old. They presented at the port of entry, as is legally required. And, Jose was separated from Mateo. Jose was detained for 8 months without knowing where his 1-year-old son, Mateo, was. When they finally reunited the father and son, because a federal judge had said that the Trump administration needed to stop these inhumane family and illegal family separations, the little boy was covered in lice and grime. He'd been kept in this tender age facility that was later closed for a number of alleged violations, alleged inappropriate contact between staff and children, harsh punishment. And the boy, it looks like he was subjected to that because he's had, trauma ever since. He used to be a very happy little boy, and now he cries all the time. And this is just one of hundreds of cases, more than 1,000 people who were separated from their children under this policy. Some parents were deported back to their countries without their children. Stephen Miller is primarily motivated by white supremacist ideologies, but there's the same, the white genocide theory, this idea that white people are being systematically replaced by people of color, and that people of color pose an existential threat to Western civilization. This is an idea that Stephen Miller, read about in the Camp of the Saints, this extremely racist book that he promoted in 2015, that promotes hatred and promotes violence against people of color. And this apocalyptic thinking is also weaponized by fascist regimes to rile people up and to get, it's to incite violence from militias who are supportive of them. And this is what you see them doing right now, breathing life into the number one homeland security threat in this country, which is right-wing and white supremacist extremism. They are responsible for a majority of extremism-related violence. And yet you only hear the acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, talking about the alleged threat of Antifa, even though it's an imagined threat. There is no threat. There's no, there's been maybe one recorded homicide from Antifa in the past several decades, whereas, right-wing extremists are responsible for more than 90% of extremism-related violence. But the reason you see this silence about the real threat is because Stephen Miller has inverted the hierarchy at the Department of Homeland Security so that most of the top positions at DHS are either vacant or held by people in acting capacity. And this is deliberate so that, any dissenting voices, national security experts, people who oppose what Stephen Miller wants for reasons of protecting the American people they've been transferred out, they've been eliminated, and now the only person really in charge is Stephen Miller.
I'm Noche Diaz, a spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs. I'll be reading Donald Trump, Genocidal Racist, Part 10, The Conclusion by Bob Avakian. Genocide means killing off a whole people or a large part of that people. Genocide is what the Europeans did to the native peoples in America while stealing their land. Genocide is Hitler and the Nazis murdering 6 million Jews. Donald Trump hates black people and everybody who is not a white, English-speaking Christian American. If he could, he would kill off a whole lot of them and put many of the rest in jail for life or drive them out of the country. This series has presented compelling evidence, just part of the mountain of evidence that could be cited, clearly showing that Donald Trump is a genocidal racist. From this, it should be obvious that it is very wrong and potentially catastrophic to underestimate the great danger that Trump poses to black people, other oppressed people, and humanity as a whole. Some people, and in particular some black people, argue that even after slavery was ended, things have always been terrible for black people in this country, so Trump really does not represent anything different or worse. Here, a lesson from history, not that long ago, sheds crucial light on things showing how seriously wrong and extremely dangerous this kind of thinking is. For centuries and centuries, Jews in Europe were segregated and cruelly discriminated against, and were repeatedly subjected to pogroms, organized massacres. But when Hitler and the fascist Nazis came to power in Germany in the 1930s, this led to the imprisonment in concentration camps of basically all the Jews in countries under Nazi control, and then to the mass murder of 6 million Jews, what the Nazis called the final solution to the Jewish problem. As I said at the beginning of these articles, yes, even after slavery was ended, black people have been continually subjected to horrific oppression and terror right down to today. But the fully unleashed rule of genocidal racism, which is what Trump is aiming for, would be a horror on a whole other level. The slow genocide of black people, which has already been going on through things like mass incarceration and continuing murder by police, can quickly become a much faster and more complete genocide if Trump and his regime succeed in remaining in power and carry forward more fully their fascist program. And once more, as I emphasized in my August 1st statement, the hour is getting late, but it is not yet too late to defeat the fascism concentrated in the fascist regime of Trump and Pence, and to wrench something positive out of this increasingly terrible situation. But that requires fully facing up to what this regime of genocidal racist fascism represents and what it is aiming to do, and using all appropriate means to remove this regime from power. Above all, the mobilization of masses of people to get in the streets starting now in the thousands, and to stay in the streets, becoming millions, powerfully putting forward the unifying demand that this fascist regime must be out now. And as I emphasized in that August 1st statement, in the most fundamental terms, it requires working to create more favorable conditions for, and to build up the organized forces for, the revolution that is needed to finally put an end to this system, which has from the beginning rested on genocidal racism and other horrific forms of oppression, and which now, with this fascist regime, is moving to take this to an even more monstrous level, posing a very real and grave threat to the very existence not only of black people, but the masses of oppressed humanity and ultimately humanity as a whole. This is not hype or exaggeration in any way. It is the cold, hard fact that we are faced with. And it demands that, in the name of and for the future of humanity, we act on the basis of fully confronting this reality and moving in our millions and millions to change this reality before it really is too late. This is the end of a series that appeared on revcom.us.
So that was Noche Diaz, spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs, reading the 10th installment of Bob Avakian's series, Donald Trump, Genocidal Racist. And with that on our minds and the stakes of that in our hearts, I think we both want to return to where we began this show with a real salute to everybody who has been out in the streets with taking up the call from refusefascism.org for day after day nonviolent protest, raising the demand Trump Pence out now, to drive this regime out before it does become too late, as he spoke about. So we have to persevere in this. And we have to gather the people. We have to wake and gather the people who know this in their hearts as well, but have not yet stepped forward to act on it.
Yeah, come on, people. Get with it. You know who this guy Donald Trump is.
That's true.
You know what he's doing. Okay, you just heard a series on genocidal racism. This guy's a white supremacist. He's a racist through and through. You saw it in his debate with Biden. You saw it in how he's treated COVID. You saw it in this segment that you did on the immigrants. We put out a slogan in Refuse Fascism that says, white supremacy plus destroying the election equals fascism. So come on, you need to get out in the streets with these people who've begun. We can do this. We can start building up the strength this month. We can drive this regime out, and any tricks or any nasty stuff that these people do, which is worse than nasty, it's fascist, it's genocidal, we can stop if we get organized in our millions and put aside our differences. All you naysayers, cut it out. There's a bigger danger than whatever you're concerned about. We got to unite right now, and that's what we're bringing you on this show. So for myself, and for other people who work on the show, Luana goes out in the streets now. You're going to see some of her recordings in the streets next episode. I just want to say stay strong and get out there, get in the streets, stay in the streets, and bring more and more people out in the streets. This Trump-Pence regime must be out now and as soon as possible.
That's right. We'll see you next week.